Just
Recording in
stand by for another
progress.
minute. Okay, we can continue.
I'll start from the beginning. Commissioner Alain?
Present.
Commissioner Irvin is excused. Commissioner Hirschbein?
Present.
Commissioner Roberts?
Present.
Commissioner Song?
Present.
Vice Chair Marusi?
Here.
Chair Womack?
Present. Can we have a report on the posting of the agenda, please?
Yes, Madam Chair and Commissioners, the agenda was published and posted on Thursday, July 22nd, and our meeting has been posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yes, a second. I second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 The next item is public comments. This time has been reserved for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on consent calendar and other agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Please note that the Planning Commission is prohibited from taking action on items not listed on the posted agenda. 3 minutes will be allowed for each speaker. Members of the public who wish to testify on items 1, 2A, 5A, and 6A are directed to comment under this portion of the agenda. If your item 3A is a public hearing item, and you can comment under this portion of the agenda or during the public hearing. Mr. Newell?
Yes, Madam Chair, our first speaker we have is James Green, followed by Howard Hyman. And if there's any other people who wish to speak at this time, please either raise your hand from the reactions function on the Zoom features or send me a message in the chat. Mr. Green.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you for your service to the city. Once again, my name is James Green. I'm a Vice Chairman of the Gene Autry Neighborhood Organization and leading our efforts regarding the Serena Park and Casa Verona housing developments. Our organization is now under new leadership for the first time since its founding in 2014 and strongly supports 3 goals related to this meeting: appropriate housing density, smart traffic management, and quality land development. As the developer, Mr. Taylor, is asking to reopen the development agreement today for changes, this is an appropriate time to revisit significant concerns for the benefit of the surrounding neighborhoods. It's concerning the goal of smart traffic management that I wish to address you today. As we all know, this is not the first time this commission, and even some of the same commissioners, have considered the Serena Park development. Over 5 years ago, in 2016, the commission took the position that a third access point to the development was necessary. I'll quote now from a news article written about that meeting that is currently posted on Serena Park's own website under press. The article states, "The Planning Commission found it unacceptable to have only 2 access points, partly because of the inefficient circulation this brings, but also only 2 entrances dumps all of the traffic from the proposed Serena Park development into the neighborhoods around Verona Road in a disproportionate fashion," commissioners said. "Without the third access, there is an unfair burden on the neighborhood in terms of access," said Kathy Wormack of the Planning Commission. The article goes on to state that designing a third entrance is not out of the question. So this being said, the Gene Autry Neighborhood Organization calls on this commission to mandate the third access point. The access previously identified as the Faro Racket Club option would be the ideal third location for optimum traffic flow, with very very close proximity to Racket Club Road. The Francis Drive access could also be considered and is currently designated for emergency vehicles only. In conclusion, our residents are anxious to see this long-awaited development move forward in a way that seriously considers the surrounding community of more than 1,000 homes. We're eager to work with this commission, the city, and Mr. Taylor to ensure that happens, while also ensuring that the three goals of smart traffic management, appropriate housing density, and quality land development are achieved. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Howard Hyman, followed by Rob Holly.
How do I enable speaking, or can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to attempt to enable video, but I don't think I can do that. Okay. Well, thank you for your time this evening. I will be brief. My name is Howard Hyman, and I own the residence at 525 Camino Caladat. My item this evening is regarding item 5A. This proposed project includes underdwelling parking. I do not believe underground parking belongs between the homes at 525 and 587 Camino Caladat. To my knowledge, the only underdwelling parking in the area exists directly up against the mountain or where the topography naturally exists for lower grade attachment to a dwelling, such as the home located at the Camino Caladat cul-de-sac at 599 Camino Caladat. It does not have living space above the garage and does not have underground parking. 599 is a totally different topography from the proposed project, and the proposed project is not up against the mountain. Visually, as proposed, it will be significantly inconsistent with the other homes built on similar topography. Also, this project, with great concern, it proposes a rooftop deck, which will be undesirable for everyone in the area and serves no purpose. The views from the patio of the mountain are going to be gorgeous without a rooftop deck. I raised opposition to the rooftop deck at the initial architectural review stage. Their solution was to add foliage, which can become infected or die, or be cut and is an inadequate fix to a long-term potential problem being created with this deck approval, well beyond the applicant's ownership. It's a bad idea overall that will hurt the neighboring values by its very existence. Will large freestanding canopy umbrellas be allowed, or a barbecue, or the stringing of cafe lights attached to freestanding poles, creating a visual nuisance? Any noise created at an unenclosed deck that high will likely reverberate against the mountain if not kept at a very low volume. I fully expect the property would be built in a style and design much more consistent with the properties on either side of it for a harmonious line of sight in all directions and similar to the homes in the Sky development. This project seeks to create a design which uniquely benefits the applicant while pressing the comforts of the neighbors and potentially having an adverse impact on their values. Under all circumstances, I oppose the rooftop deck and its potential to create a nuisance and the underground parking in the middle of a street where no comparable design exists. I never believed that such a project would be allowed to get to this point. I thank you again for your consideration and time, and hope that something gets resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Holly.
Good evening. I'm the homeowner at 587 Camino Caladat on the other side of the proposed property in 5A, and have similar concerns about the rooftop deck. To my knowledge, a number of neighbors have, at the time of build, and that have desired to put on rooftop decks, and none have been allowed. The neighborhood is one of single-story dwellings where we all have a great deal of privacy in our backyards in that. And so the thought of having somebody standing with an eye level 13.5 feet above grade, and that with direct view into other backyards and that across pools, and that is certainly undesirable. The architect contacted me and suggested some plantings with trees. And then we have a similar tree on our property that provides partial access for our partial blockage for part of the year. As we know, our mesquites and palo verdes have to be laced out multiple times a year. And at the time of lacing out for the next several months, they are clear to view through. The proposed rooftop deck would, at a very shallow angle, look directly into my master bedroom. And I do not think that rooftop deck's appropriate in the neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. That was the last request we had to speak. If there's anyone else who wishes to speak and wasn't able to raise your hand or send me a message in the chat, now would be the appropriate time to unmute your microphone.
And just as a reminder, people who are here on 5A and 6A will not have a chance to speak when we raise those items.
Hey, good evening, David. This is Lance O'Donnell. Will we have a chance to speak when
No.
the item is heard?
No.
All right. So let me share my screen. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Lance O'Donnell with O2 Architecture. We have the project that's under consideration that the prior two gentlemen just spoke to. So this is the 14th hillside project that my office has done in the city of Palm Springs. And we start all projects by looking at the zoning ordinance, specifically the hillside ordinance, to understand where we stand with regards to height setbacks and all of the other development standards. So we had some early discussions with planning and confirmed that our heights are acceptable in a hillside condition. We also had some early discussions with engineering and found out that the pad elevation is approvable in a hillside area. So we then proceeded to look at the existing conditions, and we chose a pad height that is consistent with the existing topography that's currently on site. From there, the next thing we wanted to do was to minimize the bulk on the site. So we then decided to tuck the parking and garage underneath the residence to minimize the overall bulk, optimize the open space, and to keep the residents as far towards the street as we could. So the garage as it is, its finished floor is 12 inches above the curb height. So if we were to lower the finished floor of the garage, we may have, under high water conditions, we may have a nuisance with water. While we can do various measures to ameliorate that condition, I just want everybody to know that when we chose the height for the garage, we chose it so that it was horizontal at a 2% slope into the garage. So there's not a large amount of slope between the curb and the garage. The garage is 8 feet floor to ceiling. We have 12 inches of structure above that. Then the second floor above that is 10 foot 6 inches floor to ceiling. Overall, we have 20 feet 6 inches from the lowest point of the garage to the top of the roof and the structure, which is a very modest height given the topography of what this site is doing. One of the things that we looked at was how much soil we would need to export if we were to lower the pad height. So currently, we're almost balanced with cut and fill
Lance, we're past the 3-minute mark.
Dave, may I just finish this point up? We have about 267 cubic yards of export. If we were to lower the pad height to the recommended 4 feet, we would have almost 3,000 cubic yards of export, which equates to about 300 truckloads of earth coming out of that site versus right now we're going to have about 30 trucks of export. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more speakers, Mark Allen, followed by Mike Lyle.
Here, could you hold on 1 second? Could you put okay. Sorry.
We can let Mr. Lyle go first if you'd like him to.
Yeah, that's fine. I was getting a text from my client. So
Mike Lyle, you have 3 minutes.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm here to speak about item 3A. My name is Michael Lyle. I'm a longtime resident of Palm Springs, born and raised. I'm here to speak in favor for the approval of the conditional use permit for 888 Research Drive. I've been very impressed with the applicant's attention to the community support for the project. They've even gone as far as to meet with the surrounding HOAs as to ask about the concerns that the community has regarding cannabis facilities in the area. One of the main concerns I know the surrounding community has regarding odor control, which I know the applicant and the city have paid extra attention to by meeting new odor control restrictions and standards. As a commercial real estate agent in Palm Springs, I do truly believe the use makes sense for the location adjacent to the airport runway. There is a sound wall, however, the landing and takeoffs are so loud in this location that phone calls have become difficult for businesses. This is the reason the building has suffered a vacancy problem over the years and then attracted homeless encampments and illegal dumping because of the vacancy issues. The proposed use will solve this homeless problem because security personnel and cameras will monitor the property on a daily basis. Again, I just want to reiterate that I do truly believe that this use makes sense in this particular location, and I do fully support the proposal for the conditional use permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Yeah, sorry, David. I'm Mark Allen. I represent the developer for Serena Park. And I just had a couple of comments about what we have in the staff report, the staff report such as it is. First thing I'd like to clarify is that Serena Park is not asking that the development agreement be amended. While the city, of course, can amend the development agreement with our agreement, that's not what we're asking for. Our position is that under the current circumstances, the changes, that no changes in the development agreement are actually required. All that's required is for the city to recognize that the developer has valid reasons for asking for these changes under the terms of the development agreement itself. And as we thought we made clear, but apparently was not made clear in MSA's letter, that is our position, that we're not asking for anything except for recognition that what we're asking for is already part of the development agreement and something that the city can approve as a matter of course without amending the development agreement. So that's my only statement. If you have any questions, of course, we're available to answer them.
Thank you. And that is all of the speakers we have requested, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The next item before the commission is election of officers of the chair and vice chair. Are there nominations? Can I take nominations for chair?
Actually, Madam Chair, if it please the Planning Commission, I'd like to conduct this part of the meeting for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually had something I wanted to say.
Mr. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would be happy to continue to serve as vice chair, but if somebody else on the commission would like that position, I'm very agreeable to stepping aside.
Okay, so noted. Any other comments before I ask for nominations? Seeing none, what I would like to do is proceed with the nominations for chair. And then once we've concluded the nomination and vote on the chair, I would then like to conduct the nomination and vote for vice chair. So with that, I'll go ahead and accept nominations for chair. Are there any nominations? Mr. Roberts and then Ms. Song.
I'd like to nominate Kathy Wermick to continue as chair for another year.
Okay, so we have a nomination for Kathy Wermick and then Ms. Song.
I agree with Commissioner Roberts.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Looks like we're unanimous there. So with that, Ms. Warmick is elected to the position of chair. With that, I'll go ahead and accept nominations for vice chair. Do I have any nominations? Ms. Warmick?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Roberts.
We have Mr. Roberts nominated for vice chair. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the nominations. All in favor of Mr. Roberts as vice chair, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Appears the voting is unanimous. With that, we have elected to the position of chair, Kathy Wermick, and elected to the position of vice chair, J.R. Roberts. These terms will be through June of 2022, at which time we'll conduct new elections. So with that, Madam Chair, the elections have been conducted, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. The next item before us is item 2, the consent calendar. We have in front of us item 2A, the San Jacinto Holdings LLC for a major architectural application for the construction of a 4,365 square foot house on a hillside lot located at 502 La Mirada Road. Can I have a motion on this, on the consent calendar? Commissioner Herbine.
I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second the motion, or Maria.
There's a song there.
I will second.
Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Hirschmein,
Yes.
Commissioner Song,
Yes.
Chair Warmick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roberts.
Yes.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yep.
And Commissioner Leon.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. The next item before us is a public hearing. It is Green Savants LLC on behalf of DLY Pacific West Hall, the owner, for a conditional use permit to operate a cannabis cultivation and manufacturing facility within an existing 19,192 square foot building located at 888 East Research Drive. We have on this item, we want a staff report. And before I take questions, I'd like Nicole Christ to come up so that she can testify and answer questions. Staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So the matter before you this evening is a conditional use permit application by Green Savants on behalf of the property owner to operate a cultivation facility and manufacturing facility within an existing building. The property is located at 888 East Research Drive. The proposal does involve, as I said, cultivation and manufacturing, a type 6 manufacturing license. Other uses proposed within the building include dispensary, lounge, and distribution. The existing building is 19,192 square feet in size. There is no proposed expansion of the existing footprint, but they do propose to make significant interior remodels to operate the proposed uses. So this is the site plan of the subject property. You can see the existing footprint of the building in gray, along with the parking that surrounds the building on the south and east side. The north side does have a driveway lane that extends to Research Drive, but the primary vehicular entry is on the south side of the property. The proposed uses, as I mentioned, do involve a dispensary retail within the northwest portion of the building. There is a lounge proposed at the southwest portion of the building that's shown in yellow here on the screen. The distribution is within the green area. And then the manufacturing, which is roughly just under 3,000 square feet in size, is located in the light blue on this screen. And then the cultivation is the largest portion of the use, which is roughly 11,200 square feet in size. And that's located in the darker blue here with ancillary office uses along the south side of the building. The application was submitted under a previous cannabis ordinance that regulated adult use cannabis that was became effective January of 2018. That was Ordinance 1943, which permitted cannabis manufacturing and cultivation within the M1P zone, which is the subject zoning of the project site. The applicant did submit and get issuance of a cannabis activities permit back in December of 2018, which was in compliance with the codes at that time. They did submit their land use application, which is the conditional use permit application before you back in April of 2019. And for the record, the ordinance has changed under ordinance number 2007, which changed permissible locations for cultivation uses and manufacturing uses for cannabis facilities. So generally now our cultivation and manufacturing type 6 facilities are located north of the 10 freeway. But because this application was submitted under the prior ordinance, we are processing it in accordance with the ordinance at the time. The city has special standards relative to cannabis facilities. Specifically, we have separation requirements for protected uses. There's a 600-foot requirement, 600-foot separation requirement from schools, playgrounds, parks, daycare, childcare, and youth centers. The closest school to this site is roughly 3,400 feet away to the northeast. And just so that the commission is aware, there are other uses in the immediate area. Those are residential uses that are 500 feet to the west. And the other cannabis facilities that are close by are about 1,900 feet away. I also noted in our staff report that there is a dance studio about 175 feet to the south of this site, and that is within an existing building that's 2 properties south of the property. So this is the map showing the residential uses, which are, as I said, to the west on the other side of Farrell Drive. The closest cannabis facility is located on the other side of the airport on Montalvo Way.
Where's the dance studio?
The dance studio is located in this second building here south of the subject site. The applicant is proposing some major improvements on the interior of the building to adjust the building to the proposed cannabis uses and odor that is generated from these uses. They've identified primary locations where odor-producing activities occur in certain rooms, and they are proposing the box within the box construction, as well as carbon and ionized HEPA filters within these rooms to reduce odor from those activities. They also are proposing a secondary space that will also have continuous air treatment by carbon filters, and so those are generally the hallways that lead out of the primary odor producing activity rooms. And then at the exterior of the building, each of the existing doors or doors that are proposed on the exterior, each of these locations will have an airlock room that is treated by a high volume filter as well. So as I mentioned, the primary odor producing activities that are proposed with this operation are these green areas here. These are the cultivation areas within the building. So these are what I was mentioning as the primary odor producing activities. And so these are this green color here. And so this is the cultivation portion, and this is the manufacturing portion of the building. And then the secondary areas are, as I mentioned, the hallway areas and some other storage transport locations and different indoor spaces within the building. And then lastly, they have what they're shown in orange is the neutral areas. And so those are other areas where they'll have additional odor mitigation measures in place. This is a section of the proposed odor mitigation techniques that they're using. And so basically the box in the box, the room within the building that will be continuously sealed and prevent odor from escaping these rooms, as well as the proposed equipment that will reduce the odor from the cannabis products. The odor control plan was approved by the city's consultant in March, and they've accepted it as technically correct to meet the city standards in the municipal code. The security plan for the project has also been reviewed and approved by city staff. In the commission's review of a conditional use permit, you are required to make 5 findings in order to approve the application. And these are really that the use is properly authorized by the code. As I mentioned, this was an application that was authorized under the zoning code. We have to identify that the use is necessary or desirable for the development of the community, and that it is in harmony with our general plan and not detrimental to other uses permitted in the zoning. So we've identified that if the proposed use does in fact meet all of the conditions of approval that we're proposing, there will be little or no impact relative to the odor concerns that are typically generated from the proposed use, and therefore it would be acceptable and desirable for the development of the community and not detrimental to other uses. The site has to be adequate in size and shape to accommodate the use because the operation is going within an existing building, and they will be making modifications to that building to accommodate the use. We do feel that the project meets this requirement. The streets in the surrounding area need to be properly designed to accommodate the use. We've identified in our traffic analysis for the CEQA document that the proposed site and the use will not impact the surrounding streets to any extent. And then finally, that the conditions imposed are necessary to protect the health, safety, and general welfare. As I mentioned, we have included conditions in the draft resolution to ensure that the operation is in compliance with city codes and requirements, will not generate odors off-site, and will comply with all other codes related to noise and safety. So our recommendation to the commission this evening is to adopt the negative declaration as required under the CEQA guidelines. and approve the CUP, including all conditions that are in the staff report related to protecting health, safety, and welfare, including odor control measures. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. And as the chair has mentioned, our CEQA consultant does have another obligation tonight and would be helpful if we could address the CEQA issues first before other questions to staff. Thank you.
Is Nicole Crisp here?
I am, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you have a presentation or will you just be taking questions?
I do not have a presentation. As indicated in the staff report, a negative declaration is proposed here. No mitigation measures are required. The odor control plan and the design as it relates to odors is consistent with the city's standards, and from a CEQA perspective, therefore, the impacts will be less than significant.
Do members of the commission have questions? I know I do. Commissioner Roberts, Vice Chair Roberts, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are focused to staff and particularly Veronica Goodhart, if she's with us, and I'm.
They're questions of, they're environmental questions at this point. I'm going to limit you. We'll take that next.
Okay, well, mine are with respect to the odor control plan.
If those are questions that Nicole can answer, yes.
Oh, I don't know if Nicole can answer those questions or not. I mean, let me just ask my question, and if you feel it's inappropriate, we can wait. My question is with respect to the odor control plan program that has been approved for this project. Is this a tried or true, or is this a tried mitigation program anywhere in the city of Palm Springs and any of our other approved cannabis facilities that manufacture or cultivate?
In my experience, sir, they are the measures that they're using are consistent with other measures that have been used in existing buildings. But I believe that both the city's odor consultant and Veronica may be able to give you more details in that regard.
Thank you.
Other questions for Nicole? I'm going to ask some questions. If there aren't, I'm going to ask some questions that came up regarding another plan at council last week. And there are three different areas regarding energy and the use of electricity. It doesn't, what is the electrical use that we can anticipate? Are they doing any solar at the project to mitigate that? Are they buying electricity from an environmentally friendly source? Are any of those questions dealt with in the negative deck?
And I'm going to back up a little, Madam Chair, to give a little background on this. I was at the city council meeting that you referenced. I was there for another item and was asked about another facility as it related to energy, water, and GHG emissions. From the perspective of some research that one of the council people had undertaken that was outside the CEQA process. I have been provided that research and additional data and am working with staff to report on that. But those questions are outside the thresholds determined under CEQA. The GHG calculations come from what is called the Cal-EMOD model and quantify based on available data. We do not have, in this case, existing electrical use for this facility because it is new to the building. However, with the additional insulation they're providing, and the insulation is required also for the odor control, so that it serves a double purpose. They are buttoning up the building much better than an average commercial or industrial building would be buttoned up. Those measures serve to improve electrical usage and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by association. As it relates to water use, we have done a fair bit of research for other projects in other jurisdictions on water use, and we'll look at the councilman's documentation and report on that. But I have not undertaken that research since last week's council meeting.
And the other question I had, in several areas, it mentions that there are no sensitive receptors in the area. I think it's under emissions and others, but there is a dance studio, which from what I can tell, primarily has its primary business as young children taking dance lessons. And in several instances, it says that there are none within 5,000, or I think it's 5,000 feet.
Well, it depends on the analysis category, ma'am. We look at sensitive receptors from the perspective of air quality and air quality impacts. There's a sensitive receptor analysis there, and there's also in the noise section. In this regard, based on the standards that we are required to study from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, there are no sensitive receptors within the defined distance. The dance studio would not be considered under SCAQMD rules as a sensitive receptor because it is not a place of residence. So people are, and air quality impacts are not odor impacts. So air quality impacts are carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, those types of things generally emitted by, to the greatest degree, by automobiles, also emitted by other sources. And a sensitive receptor is one under air quality rules where a person resides or spends most of a day. So it would be a home, a hotel, a retirement facility, a school because of the amount of time that's spent at a school. But at a dance studio, it would be considered under SCAQMD rules as a commercial activity where there was not significant exposure from those people attending the school.
Thank you. Are there other questions of Ms. Crisp? Thank you so much.
Thank you for accommodating my schedule, ma'am. I am monitoring the other planning commission meeting and my item has not come up yet, so I will stay as long as I can.
Thank you. And I will go back to Commissioner Roberts. He had questions, further questions of staff.
Thank you. So again, just restating my question, have we tried this, what is essentially, I think, new technology of having the envelope within the building, within an older building, to contain odors? Do we have any experience with that yet with any of our other cannabis facilities?
And by that, you mean, are they operational and working?
Yes, and do we, yes.
So is that a question?
Do we have any history with them at all in operation? And then, of course, what are we finding about them? Are they truly containing the odor, or do we have just anything that can be shared with us about that system?
So since we have began imposing that condition of approval, none of those operators have become operational. So we don't have anything to compare it with at this time.
Do we have information from facilities outside of Palm Springs with respect to how successful they are?
I would have to defer that to Jay.
Yeah, and we go and we work with other jurisdictions, and most jurisdictions do what Palm Springs is doing in concentrating their cannabis activities in one or a couple of areas, and they've zoned them appropriately. Not as many people have had the odor issues as Palm Springs, and not a lot of jurisdictions have issues with odors that we have found. There have been some concerns here locally in Santa Rosa with one or two properties, but they got mitigated and everything was fine after that. But not too many complaints out there. If an odor mitigation system is designed and installed and certified correctly, it works.
It works. And you know that specifically from projects that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, odor is hard to quantify, but absolutely. I mean, we probably have, I would say, upwards of 25 to 35 operational cannabis cultivation projects that we've been the mechanical engineer of record for, not in the odor capacity and designing the odor systems. And absolutely, they function within their zoning just fine. In fact, we have a little Canna Valley up here in Santa Rosa off of Yolanda Avenue where every property in there is a cannabis property, and there's no discernible odors, and it's all cultivation and manufacturing.
And it's all using this mitigation system that's being proposed here tonight?
Yeah, well, the one that's being proposed here tonight is slightly different than what the new requirements that you have are. It does not include the dilution. This is one of those pipeline projects that actually got caught up in our pipeline as well, and the review was previous to us reviewing it under the new regulations. So, but yes, they do, using these types of systems, they do mitigate the odors, but we would like to see this be enhanced with the dilution that the new requirements do require. This does not have.
That's helpful to me. So we are not imposing the dilution program here on this.
Right. This is pipeline. Yeah, this was one of those pipeline projects, if I'm remembering correctly. This is now our third review of this. So our review actually began quite some time ago. So it is hinged, or it was hinged back to those older requirements. And we've subsequently been directed to review it against the newer requirements, but this review floats in that dead space where it didn't happen. It happened before that.
Can we compare the mitigation program for this project with King's, what's the second word of the King's
Garden
program? Is this applicant proposing the same mitigation program that the King's Garden used?
Which property?
Veronica, will you help me here?
3535 Anza.
Yeah, the new design that they've submitted that has been in for permit, that one is the new standards. This odor mitigation system is the old standards.
What did King's Garden have formally? What's being proposed?
Similar, not quite this. I mean, this is certainly better than the original systems that kind of went through approval process, but it is not at the level of what the new standards would be, but it's similar to what the original property at King's Garden was. King's Gardens was a little bit different in the sense that there's a lot of exterior equipment that has a lot of just dedicated leakage that there's almost nobody can do anything about, except solve it the way we're all solving it. But this does not have that.
So if I understand you properly, what's being proposed for this application is what was similarly used for the former application of King's Garden.
Similar, yes.
Okay. I'll let others ask questions at this point. Thank you.
Before I go to other people, I wanted to clarify one point with Jay. that you had asked, the 25 to 35 properties that you've worked with this application, are they properties that are existing buildings or were they new buildings?
Oh, most are existing buildings. Most cannabis projects are usually capturing existing square footage. So yeah, they're usually existing.
And they have worked with this?
Yes.
Thank you. Going to Lori Elenian and then Commissioner Hirschbein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question for staff is regarding the justification letter that I see in the package. It indicates that all state required permits have been obtained except the cultivation permit. I wonder if somebody can explain, is there a holdup? Do these things just take years? Is there any reason to believe that this might not be approvable for licensing under the state?
It takes some time. That's why we issue the initial administrative permit, which allows them to start the state process. And they may be waiting also for approval of the CUP to ensure that they obtain that license.
Okay, so they wait for the outcome of this first. The second question I have is, for staff, is kind of, how did we get to determine that this is an allowable use under a conditional use permit in an industrial zone? As I understand it, the manufacturing is one of the specifically identified uses that is permissible under a CUP in this zone. But this, there's only a small amount of manufacturing going on. If you take a look at the footprint and the information we're giving about the building, this is pretty much an agricultural use. The cultivation takes up the lion's share of the building. And I don't see that a cultivation use or an agricultural use is allowable with a CUP in this zone. Am I missing something?
Commissioner Eileen, the issue was when the city changed the cannabis regulations in 2019, the M1P zone list of permitted uses was changed as well. So with the adoption of ordinance number 2007, we've removed cultivation and manufacturing. So when you look up the online code, it no longer identifies it. But when this application came in under the previous ordinance 1943, those uses were permissible.
So that is what the waiver that needs to come from the city manager would be doing, is waiving the current requirement that precludes agriculture or this use from the zone and reverting to the previous code.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. The other thing
Takas has a comment.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to address the floor plan. Generally, looking at that floor plan of what the uses are, we would consider that a boutique grow. That is the manufacturing facilities are not large in terms of square footage, and a 3,000 square foot manufacturing facility is a pretty good sized one, and that's a relatively smaller grow.
Okay, so the nature of the use is not tied into the amount of the building that is dedicated.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's
right. Yeah. Okay. And then my final question is about the dance studio. I understand from what Ms. Chris said that SCAQMD identifies certain sensitive receptors and that this dance studio would not meet their criteria and therefore it does not figure. Nonetheless, I see that the municipal code identifies uses, including youth center or a school or childcare or park, as being not appropriate to have within 600 feet of a facility like this. So I'm wondering how, I see that the staff report notes that there is a dance studio within 175 feet, but not what makes this dance studio different from the other protected uses, like a youth center, where same thing, people would come, children would come for several hours a day, or a park or something like that? How does this not meet the criteria? Is it simply because it's a commercial use rather than a civic use, or?
So there is some area here that can be deemed as a gray area. Our code does not have a definition for a youth center, but the state definition that is referred to when reviewing cannabis items states that a youth center means any public or private facility that is primarily used to host recreational or social activities for minors, including but not limited to private youth membership organizations or clubs, social service, teenage club facilities, video arcades, or similar amusement facilities. So there are some cities and some counties who deem dance studios that offer classes primarily to children as youth centers, and there are some that do not. Our code is silent on that definition.
Okay, and we interpreted silence as being permissive. Is that what I'm understanding?
Madam Chair, if I may, I think I may be able to address Ms. Halayan's question here. As Ms. Goodhart said, the term youth center is not defined in the code, which leaves some room for interpretation. If the Planning Commission determines this evening that the dance facility is a youth center under our code, then I believe the Planning Commission would have a basis to deny this CUP, because it would be, this application would be located within 600 feet of a youth center as interpreted by the Planning Commission. And that would call into question being able to make one or two of the findings for a CUP. On the other hand, if the Planning Commission determines that the dance facility is not a youth center, then you may still be able to make the findings to approve the CUP.
Thank you, City Attorney. I understand, and that concludes my questions for staff.
Commissioner Hirschbein? You're muted.
The questions were covered. Thank you.
Commissioner Song, and then Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yes, so I know that the application has been, for the lack of term, sort of grandfather. Is there an expiration when applications were brought in with the previous allotment? Within what time an application should be submitted in order to be approved within the older rules?
We did not initially in the original ordinance. When we revised the ordinance for cannabis, we put a 3-year deadline. So they had 3 years from date of original issuance.
Okay, and Veronica, do you also know why from the public hearing or meeting with the with the neighborhood in May 2019, do you know why we're here 2 years later? What were the issues in which the application did not come, or maybe you're not privy to that information?
I do not know. That was the applicant did not submit anything.
Okay, and then this is for staff. The environmental report states that the residences are located about 600 feet away. The report that you show 500 feet away. The notification map, the 500 feet grazes over the single family area. Do we not have a separation requirement to residential areas, only to 600 feet to schools and youth centers and so on? Is that the case?
The current ordinance requirements does have a 600, I believe it's 600 foot. There is a separation requirement from residential, but when this application was received, that requirement was not part of the regulations.
So even with older rules, there was no separation requirement to residences?
There was not.
Oh, okay. Right. And then is there consideration, let's see if I can ask the question. Currently the area to the west is vacant, even though it is zoned for industrial. And then to that, you see the view to the single family residential areas. And then from there, it's about 2.5 miles to the mountain. Is there a consideration that there are no industrial buildings in between, buffering between this building and then the residential area? Is that considered as part of the general map, general plan, or is it simply because there are no other similar facilities within, 2,000 feet that therefore this use is allowed?
The Planning Commission, so I guess the property to the west is an undeveloped M1P zoned property. So at some point that property would conceivably be developed with a use that's permitted in the M1P zoning. But in terms of the Planning Commission's consideration of this application, the Commission can consider the existing circumstances as it relates to your findings that are necessary for approval, in this case, surrounding properties and uses when you're making your decision. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but if you see that it is problematic that the use is close to residential, and because the area between the proposed use and that residential is easily traversable or problematic for a reason that you've determined, then you can make that as part of your findings.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, pardon me?
Commissioner Maruzzi, just comment.
This is either for staff or for our city attorney. Has this application met all of the requirements that were in effect when this grandfathered application was submitted?
Staff, yes, staff has identified all of the applicable ordinances that were in place at the time in the report. So in terms of what was allowed in the zoning code at the time, this is a use that was permitted by CUP. As we've identified, there are separation requirements to protected uses. We've given you a recommendation. The commission could interpret the code differently. And if the commission does, then you would make a different decision on the application. But the application and staff's analysis did meet codes at the time it was received.
When was the application submitted exactly?
April 2019.
Just out of curiosity, when did the dance school move in? Do you have any idea?
I don't have a specific time frame when that they've been since they've been at that location, but I know that we have received a public comment from someone who's representing that facility. And I'm not sure they may be speaking on this item tonight as well. So
okay, and the reason I'm asking is because if the school moved in after the application was filed and accepted by the city for the cannabis use, then there was some knowledge that this type of manufacturing facility was going to be there.
No, it was received, the application was, the studio has been there prior to this, the request of this application.
Say it again?
The studio was there previous to the city receiving.
Oh, okay. So it was there previously?
Yes.
So I had one other question related to that. If I remember it, I'll ask it. Thanks.
My friend said they left that beer sitting there. Got it to leave.
I wanted to follow up on that question. If staff had interpreted the dance school as a or the dance school is equivalent to a school, a youth center, in terms of the state's definition, if you had interpreted it that way, would it have met all of the requirements?
It would have required a waiver from city council to reduce the distance requirement. So it required a separate land use action in addition to the conditional use permit.
However, if I may, Madam Chair, as Mr. Newell said, absent that council waiver of distance, if you were to interpret a dance facility such as this to be a youth center, then there would be a separation distance issue that I believe would preclude a positive finding for finding number one, that the use applied for at the location in the application is properly one for which a CUP is authorized. If you find that it is within the 600 feet of a youth center, absent that distance waiver, our suggestion would be that that finding could not be made because the code would not allow that facility to be at that location, thereby precluding a CUP.
Thank you.
But again, that's the question of interpretation.
Right. And I have just a few technical questions. Does the applicant have solar on this facility?
I don't believe they've proposed that, Madam Chair, but the applicant is available to address that question during the public hearing.
I have three similar questions like that. Is the grow center proposed to be hydroponic and water saving?
And I don't have an answer for that, so I'd defer that to the applicant.
And has the applicant been asked about using clean energy?
Also a question I think the applicant will need to respond to.
Right. There being no more questions.
I have one more question.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
When the city council allowed this, or proposed and allowed this 3-year grandfather aspect, these kinds of things certainly were potential to arise, and in their wisdom, they nonetheless gave a grandfather clause for 3 years. So there must be some understanding on the council that these other uses may pop up in the interim, or there may be other issues that come up. So I'm just trying to understand, does anyone remember why? And I think maybe Vice Chair Roberts was on the council at that time, why this 3-year grandfather clause was put in.
I'll go ahead and jump in and respond to that. As we were looking at amending the zoning regulations for cannabis uses based on community concern, we did have a number of applicants who had already submitted their administrative permit and were making progress on submitting conditional use permits. It was the opinion of the council that time that those that were in process should be allowed to proceed. And so there is language in the adopting ordinance that does allow for grandfathering, if you will, of certain applications that were already in process. And so that was the intent, based on the fact that some were already in process under the regulations that were in place at the time of submittal.
Okay, I'll wait until comments to continue this discussion.
The matter is now before the public. The applicant has 10 minutes. Members of the public will have 3 minutes and the applicant 3 minutes for rebuttal. Is the applicant present?
Yes, it's Matthew up there, waving his hand.
Yes, Matt Reddick here. I'm the applicant and engineer on the project. I've been a part of the project since day one. So thank you, council members, for taking the time to hear our project tonight. and I am here and available to answer any questions you may have or the residents of Palm Springs may have tonight.
Thank you. If you'd stay available, if there are questions after the public hearing. Are there members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, please identify yourself.
My name is Matt Fry. I'm one of the owners of the building where the dance studio is located. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm concerned, is there still a smoking facility in this project?
Yes.
I'm concerned that we've got a bunch of kids being driven by their parents to the dance studio and people that are going to be driving around high right where they're going to intersect each other. I'm concerned about that for accidents and deaths. That's my question or comment.
Mr. Fry, would you stay available if there are questions of you?
Yes.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing none, the applicant has 3 minutes for rebuttal. Mr. Reddick?
Yes, Council, I'd like to address the concern. There is a smoking lounge located in the front of the property. Everybody is ID'd per state and city local security compliance on their entry and exit of this facility. We monitor the consumption of the product to the best of our abilities with our trained staff and their education levels to ensure that we do not have people under consumption leaving the facility, just like you would at any other bar or locally owned family restaurant for that same matter. To address a few other comments, we have reached out to a local solar contractor in the area. We are very excited to hopefully have enough solar panels on the property to offset the electricity of the front lounge, dispensary, retail, and distribution area. By doing that, we would cover all of the roof that is capable to be covered, with the exception of where the mechanical units and odor control systems are placed. So that'll cover about 70% of the feasible roof area in solar panels in order to make up that power difference. We also had a question about hydroponic growing. The facility does operate on full hydroponic growing with water recirculation systems. What that means is that the plants are dosed multiple small doses throughout the day. The residual water is then captured and pumped back to what we refer to as water room at the rear of the facility, where that water goes into a tank and it's cleaned and reused for the plant to get as close to what's known as a zero waste or zero drain facility as possible.
Are there questions of the applicant? Seeing none, I have some. Would you be willing to have a condition on this property that you have 70% of your roof area covered with solar?
I think we would definitely be open to that. I don't know if we want to state exactly 70%, but we could state maximum coverage with allowable accessible service walkways and means of serviceability around our mechanical rooftop units. So essentially stating the same thing, Madam Chair. I just don't want to agree to an exact percentage. If it per se comes to 67%, I can't magically make roof space appear.
And then the second question is, I think you have been notified that you have a system, an odor control system that could be upgraded to our current requirements. Would you be willing to have your odor control system upgraded to the current requirements that the city has and that it imposes on new applicants?
I would, and to also address that, this has been a long project that we've been working on with the city and the odor control consultants. But on our mechanical plan sheets, M1.1A, we do have an air mixing high velocity 4600 CFM reciprocating fan that is blending and mixing the air at rooftop level prior to discharge after filtration. I believe that was the concern. That was the main change on that radial blending fan, if that was actually in fact a part of our design, and that has been incorporated. And I know some of the other council members had some concerns, or addressed rather, the amount of time in which this has taken. We have done our part to try to stay on top of this project. It is a large project. During the odor control changes, we actually had to redo all of the mechanical and electrical engineering for those submittals. The odor consultants then had to take some time to review that and provide us commentary, where we had to update our engineering and resubmit. We went through about 3 processes of that before we got an approval. The odor control staff and third-party consultants that were hired by the city are very tedious and very good at their job. And they helped us through this process and made sure that we had all the correct equipment on this property to ensure that we don't have any odor being released from the building to the local residents.
And the last question I wanted to ask you is regarding the energy you purchase. Would you be willing to purchase that as clean energy from, and possibly Flynn can help me with the right name, or someone, the right name. I think it's, I'm not sure what we call our community energy company.
Carbon-free or carbon-neutral energy options.
So currently, the property's energy is supplied from SoCal Edison. I'm not sure if this is within collaboration with them. We are allowed to offset our energy consumption by means of photovoltaic panels, being solar panels, and or possible wind energy, if we have the correct placement and height allocation for that on our property. As far as a carbon-free plan, I believe we would be open to that. We're not sure how that works within the legalities of being supplied from SoCal Edison currently at the property.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Mr. Fry here? And I would like to ask him, and possibly the commission would like to, Flynn, am I able to do this with an applicant, with a person who's commented, to ask them a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, you may.
Mr. Fry, one of the things we haven't been able to find out, we did look today and visit the facility to see the percentage of the classes that are for children or young or youth. Can you tell us exactly how the dance studio is being used?
Well, I don't know their exact hours, but parents drop their kids off. There's a lot. It's a very popular dance studio. It's one of the best and most popular in the valley. So it's very busy. There's lots of cars coming and going. I'm not sure the exact hours, but certainly after school till it's dark.
And so it's mainly children?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Roberts, you had questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for Mr. Fry. How long has the dance studio been in existence?
I don't know the exact years, maybe 10, maybe longer.
Thank you, sir. Question for Mr. Rettig. Are you there?
Yes, sir, I am here.
Thank you. Mr. Rettig, is this your first manufacturing and cultivation facility?
This would be my first manufacturing facility in Palm Springs. However, I represent a very large engineering firm. We've completed a little over 1,000 projects around the country.
Oh,
Okay, so you're representing the owner here.
Yes, sir.
I understand. And are you familiar with the odor mitigation requirements that Palm Springs is requiring?
Yes, I was personally involved in the engineering aspects of the plans on this project and the submittal process. So I am very aware of what your processes are and others.
Have you in the past with your other clients used these mitigation programs, specifically the one that we are requiring today with our new applications?
We have utilized all of this with the exception of the radial blending fan, which I believe that will be an additional aid to the odor control. But we have installed negative and positive ion. We have installed carbon filtration, carbon scrub. We have also done the box in a box with the dual insulated layer. These are, I guess, common good manufacturing practices of the industry that have been instituted in Colorado, Long Beach, Seattle, Arizona. We have came across this in multiple other jurisdictions, and it has helped out surrounding cities and areas tremendously that had odor concerns originally.
Can you quantify the success of these programs and specifically the blending if we go to that level here?
So I think the difference with the blending would be is the discharge puts the air into a high velocity funnel into atmosphere, so it dissipates based on separation. And also with this in particular facility, the reason why that'll have an even greater positive effect of odor mitigation is because this is adjacent to the airport. So you're going to have high winds and adjacent jet streams that once that air is projected up, if any odor is in it at all, once it goes through all of the scrubbing nature, that air would be dispersed and basically diluted into such a minute amount at that point that there would be no odor able to be picked up from, human scent.
Thank you, sir. I now have questions for Veronica Goodhart and other staff members with respect to the success of...
1 second. At this point, the public hearing is closed. So unless somebody has a question for Mr. Rettig or Mr. Fry, I would like to then take it. So Commissioner Song, do you have questions?
Yes. Mr. Rettig, how flexible are you in removing the lounge from your facility?
I would need to speak on that basis with the owners of the property. I cannot make that decision solely as the engineering representing party on the engineering basis. However, what I can say is that the owners are very flexible in their practices. They want to work with the city of Palm Springs, and I feel that they would be open to that, and that would expand their retail shopping area, assuming that would be something of an equal equivalent that the city would consider.
Thank you.
The matter at this point is before the commission. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Roberts and his questions, which I just stopped.
That's okay. I really have one more question. And then I have a number of comments, but I'll save that. My question was to Ms. Goodhart and or other staff members with respect to the success or not success with mitigation programs in the past. Please correct me, but my understanding is that we had a terrible time with King's Garden in mitigating odor. And my concern is that the mitigation that's being proposed for this particular application is not that different than what King's Garden was doing. Can someone correct me on that?
Yes, I can. I misspoke earlier. In fact, Matthew was correct. He does have the dilution that their system does adhere to the new standards. So my apologies to all of you. I was back at a previous review. So, but their new system is in accordance with their new standards. So it does have the dilution. It does the pressure cascading, filtration, and dilution.
Can someone respond to my question about the success or failure of odor mitigation at King's Gardens?
I can tell you they're in the process of working on it. I know they've been in building permit, seeking approval for a permit. And I know that's a process that's ongoing. And I think they just received their permit, but I'm not entirely sure. And we are working with them, working towards compliance of their ANZA property to the new requirements. And that's an active process.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Goodhart, with respect to enforcement, what did you find with King's Garden? Did we find, am I inaccurate, or did we have a tremendous amount of leakage of odor?
There was a tremendous amount of leakage. It had a lot to do with the age of the building and the location of the HVAC equipment. It has been a multi-year ongoing work with them, but they have been very willing and they've been working with our other consultants ongoing. So this last correction to their HVAC system should address the odor issues.
You feel comfortable with that?
I rely on our odor consultants' opinions, yes.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Madam, I have comments, but I'll reserve them until after other members have questions.
If you don't mind, you mentioned something about quantifying some of the odors. And one of the things I sent Veronica an email earlier this afternoon. One of the things you look at, if you have a building that has significant amount of equipment on the exterior of it, there's not a lot you can do to guarantee no leakage. So we assume leakage rates in the industry. We assume certain things. Even if you try, we assume certain leakage rates. With the new requirements, what we're doing is we're taking those known leakage rates that King's Garden had in spades. Every air moving piece of equipment was located on the roof, contributing to that nominal air leakage rate. The solution brings the air moving pieces of the equipment into the room. So from our estimation, we're going from about 3,000 CFM on the conservative side of known leak rate to a controlled distribution, filtration, and dilution of 250 CFM. So we're having about a 95% saturated, 95% mitigation of what was already there. And that's just in airflow, not in odor. We're looking to substantially mitigate to no discernible level.
Commissioner Maruzzi?
Yeah, this is a question for staff. Does current zoning allow a business that serves alcohol, such as a bar, to be located within 100 feet of a commercial use, such as a dance studio?
Our zoning code doesn't have setback standards for the M1P for alcohol uses, but I'm actually just pointing up the ordinance just to confirm a liquor store that would even be permitted in the zone.
You can see where I'm heading with this. If the issue of concern with the dance studio is that intoxicated people will exit and be a hazard to children or others that may be in cars or walking. But if there is no equivalent requirement for a bar, I would have concerns that we're imposing something that isn't consistent. Or a restaurant that serves alcohol.
Other comments? I have questions for staff. Before we do comments, questions for staff. Commissioner O'Lanigan?
Yes. One of the things that we're asked to find if we approve this is that the use is necessary or desirable for the development of the community. I haven't heard, and the findings that are in our package and proposing the resolution don't address that. They don't specifically speak to what would make this desirable or necessary. So I'm wondering, I believe it's fair to say, but I'm asking you, that there are in the community a number of multiple locations where there is cannabis retail, multiple locations where there is cultivation, and multiple locations where there is manufacturing. Which would mean that if we understand that cannabis is necessary and we benefit from having it provided in our community, that we don't specifically need it at this location. David, can you speak to that?
Certainly, Commissioner Land. Yeah, so this finding that you're referring to is finding number 2 in the conditional use permit findings that are necessary for approval. And so it does state necessary, a use is necessary or desirable for the development of the community. Certainly that is up for interpretation, and the commission has the ability to indicate that the proposed use will further our community in one manner or another, or if it won't, why that is the case. You know, in this case, the proposed use is for cultivation and manufacturing. One could argue that the cannabis use, cannabis cultivation and manufacturing contribute to, you know, people who might have PTSD or health issues, and this use would be desirable for that within our community. Then there's the other side of that, where you might suggest that this is not desirable for the community because of the location, because the use as it relates to the associated impacts with a manufacturer or cultivation use create undesirable effects as it relates to its operation or its whatever it might be. So it is really up for the commission to make the discretion, or the commission has full discretion as it makes the findings for this application.
Okay. But is it fair to say that we do have other locations, a number of other locations in the city where these services are provided?
It is fair to say that, yes, we do have a number of applications, cultivation uses and manufacturing uses in the city.
Madam Chair, if I could expound on what Mr. Newell had mentioned.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
I would actually like to finish people asking questions of staff, and then I'll bring you back in.
I'd like to, is there an answer from David or Flynn regarding my question?
I believe I can provide an answer, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm not aware of any provisions in the municipal code that set hard distance restrictions between liquor uses and cannabis uses, or liquor uses and other uses within the city. There are state regulations under the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department that have over-concentration rules. So many liquor facilities can be within a census block, and if that number is exceeded, the city council has to issue what's called a certificate of public convenience or necessity. But that's a separate thing specific to an over-concentration of liquor uses within a census tract. There's nothing in the code I'm not aware of that says cannabis uses and liquor uses must be separated by a set distance. They cannot serve alcohol at the same facility where cannabis is being sold, but there's nothing about set distance requirements that I'm aware of.
My question wasn't about distance between the cannabis facility and the bar. It's between a commercial use such as a dance studio and a cannabis facility, or a bar, either.
I'm not aware of anything like that in the code either that sets that, you know, that specific distance between liquor uses and a sensitive use, such as a youth center or a school.
Yeah, Mr. Priest is correct.
Okay.
Other questions of staff? And if not, there was another question you were going to answer, Mr. Priest.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The finding number 2 that Ms. Land was mentioning earlier, that is really the broadest and most discretionary of the 5 findings for a CUP. And so if the Planning Commission were to make a determination that the use was not necessary or desirable or would be detrimental to existing uses, I would suggest that the Planning Commission make some very specific findings based on the evidence we've heard on the record as to why it's not necessary or desirable or why it would be detrimental. Thank you.
I have a question of staff, and for me, the daycare is really the critical, or not the daycare, the dance studio is the critical issue. I'm wondering if staff just missed that in their staff report, that it was a longstanding, heavily used youth center, or do you not consider, did you miss that it was primarily children? Or do you not consider that something, have you made a staff decision that a dance studio is not a youth center and therefore should not have been an absolute prohibition?
Under our analysis, we reviewed the location. We reviewed the operation as a commercial operation as opposed to a youth center, which in our review, we considered what we typically see as the Boys and Girls Club as what we have seen as youth centers, or a YMCA as a youth center. So in our review, we reviewed it as a commercial operation that wasn't the same as a youth center, such as a Boys and Girls Club or YMCA.
But the state definition doesn't require that, correct? The state definition says it can be either commercial or public.
Correct. I mean, it says that it can be private or public.
Private or public. I think the matter is before the commission at this point. We have a couple of threshold issues. One is whether the dance studio is a youth center, and therefore as a threshold, we can't approve this. I think then we go to the questions of, is this necessary? And we go to whether we can make the findings, and we go through the applicant's plan in terms of anything that we would want to require if we determine that the youth center that the dance studio doesn't take this, that we can't approve it. And then secondly, if we do want to approve it, what conditions we want to put on the project. Commissioner Hirschbein.
Well, I'm willing to go on record as supporting the notion that this qualifies as a youth center, and therefore all the other pieces fall into place after that.
Anyone else? Commissioner Roberts?
I think Commissioner Baruzzi had his hand up before I did.
Commissioner Baruzzi.
I'm just trying to think about this from the perspective of the applicant for a moment. Was this ever brought up? And if this has been an issue for an application for 3 years, did anyone ever say to them, there's a dance studio near this place, you might not want to locate your business here? It just seems like it's very late in the process. There's all the money they spent in putting together this project. And then we say, well, it's too close to the dance studio. I don't know why you're putting it here. Now, if the solution is that they agree not to include a lounge, does that suffice in terms of issues related to the youth center? Those are the questions that I have in terms of my decision. Is it the lounge is the issue?
No, it's a complete exemption, which is the issue. It takes it out of the realm. It's within 600 feet of, is it 600 feet? I'm not sure, of a use that prohibits this kind of facility. Commissioner Olanian.
First of all, I agree with Commissioner Hirschbein. I believe that fundamentally the dance center operates like the YMCA or like the recreation district does, in that they provide dance classes, they provide activities for at the recreation district, you would pay $2 or $5 for a class, whereas at the for-profit enterprise, you're paying $30 or $40 for a class. I have no idea what the prices. I'm throwing it out there. So I agree that they are fundamentally the same thing. And I would also say, with regard to notification of to the applicant of use that could be considered incompatible, the onus is on the applicant to do their homework and find out what other uses are there. The system in place provides for public notice being sent to all neighboring property owners when you calendar this for a public hearing. They don't do research. They don't do the applicant's due diligence for them in advance, 2 years in advance of knowing for certain that a public hearing is going to go through. So I really believe that the onus should be on the applicant for that information.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to just make a quick statement. The question had been asked, could this be remedied by removing the lounge facility? Looking at the code that's being applied to this application, because again, this was a grandfathered application, the 600-foot distance from a youth center applies to this was the terminology we used in the day, any medical cannabis facility or adult use cannabis facility, which is inclusive of, all of those types of facilities. So I don't know that applying the older standard, just removing the lounge, addresses the issue. Again, if the commission interprets youth center to include this dance facility, the remedy under the old code would have been, and continues to be, a city council waiver of the distance requirement.
There's a state mandatory setback of 600 feet, and you can't waive the state.
I'm going to just speak and say that I consider this a youth center.
If commission agrees that it's a youth center, what would be the necessary motion that would need to be made and approved?
Madam Chair, I believe I can speak to that.
Please.
I believe first of all, finding one would not be able to be made. That the use applied for at the location set forth in the application is properly one for which a conditional use permit is authorized by this zoning code. Our position would be that if the commission believes that the dance center is in fact the dance facility is a youth center, therefore not complying with the 600-foot distance requirement, this would not be properly one for which a CUP is authorized by the code because there's the distance restriction problem. I think you could also dovetail that in with finding two, but I think finding one would be the one that would be the negative finding because it would not comply with the code as interpreted by the commission.
I'm willing to make that motion based on what council's advised us.
Okay. We have a second. Do we have a second? I'll second that.
Can we have discussion?
Yes, we can have discussion. Commissioner Roberts had his hand up.
Thank you. I have to say that I struggle with this. With everything we've heard about local zoning and everything we've heard about state requirements, whether the dance academy can be considered a recreational or a primarily a youth use is fuzzy to me. Now, I do understand, I visited the site, I do understand that the Dance Academy teaches a lot of classes for kids. But I struggle with this, and it seems to be coming out of the blue a little bit, which I have concerns about. A commissioner asked earlier tonight about why this particular application had stayed in the pipeline with the former city council, which I was a part of. And all we really did at that time was we had moratoriums coming on and off while we were writing the policy. And the moratoriums were simply to give us time to gather information and try to do policy. It was in no way up to a way to allow applicants to not come forward with the best mitigation for odor or any of the problems. My problem here is that this Dance Academy thing's coming out of the blue. I would like the application to speak to what they knew. Was this a discussion with staff? Has this ever come up before, given that the Dance Academy has been there for 10 years? I just need a little bit more information on this. Especially if the Planning Commission is potentially moving in the direction of denying this based on the Dance Academy.
Just speaking to that, we can ask that question, but I'm more persuaded by what Commissioner Olanian said, which is the applicant is required to do due diligence. Something coming up at the Planning Commission level is not coming up out of the blue. It's a legitimate question for the Planning Commission to be considering. And if staff missed it in their analysis, that still doesn't take away the fact that it is an issue. If it is a youth center, it's an issue that doesn't allow us to make a finding that would allow us to approve a CUP. Commissioner Hirschbein.
Well, I'd like to address the out of the blue comment also. Clearly staff has a different interpretation of what a youth center is than some of the commission members do. And our job is to make interpretations of things that are not so clear. Now, whether staff advise them of the possibility that the commission might disagree with their interpretation of what a youth center is or not, it is not something that we should use to determine what a youth center is.
Commissioner Roberts.
Madam Chair, my concerns go to how we deal with applications and applicants. So regardless of how we treat this particular application, we have policy in place. And as an applicant comes through a process, and this applicant clearly went through a tremendous amount of process and cost, starting with city, local zoning, and then state process, and now back to us. And what I meant by out of the blue is our own staff said to us, this seemed a little bit fuzzy. And I understand Commissioner Hirschbein's point of, well, that's our job to make the determination. But I think we do need clearer policy on this. I think that if we don't have very clear and solid direction on these things, we have a problem. I think if there were clear direction, or the policy were more clear, staff could have easily said to this applicant, hey, you're within 200 feet of a dance academy that we're considering a youth use. This is going to be a big problem for you. And that clearly didn't happen here. And that's what I meant about out of the blue. It's not really discussed at all in our packet. What I mean is we're just dealing with it right now, and it's potentially going to sink this application. That's my concern. My bigger concerns about this cannabis use is odor. What we have found consistently with pretty much every cannabis use was that the impacts were minimal and that they could be very good uses in commercial buildings because they're quiet, they don't have a big impact of traffic. The only real problem we were having over and over and over again was odor, which is why I kept going to that issue. And if you don't have odor coming out of a facility, your impacts to the surrounding uses is minimal. The Dance Academy is close, but it's 2 full buildings away and 2 parking lots away. So unless there's real odor coming out, I don't see how the impacts will be enormous. I'm not trying to sway the commission in any way at all. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, simply because this applicant's been through a tremendous amount of process, and I think we owe them that.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yes, I completely agree. That's been my concern all along, from the perspective of the applicant and how this got so far. And if it's not an odor issue, which we know is a problem, and it's been addressed per our odor consultant, and the distance from, the academy is 2 parking lots away, I have trouble supporting this.
2 parking lots away is still within 600 feet. And the person who owns the building where the dance studio is said that they had a concern about people possibly being high, but driving around a facility with children. And that comes under any use. It's not just odor. It comes under manufacturing. It comes under distribution. It comes under lounge. It comes under sales.
But aren't there restaurants and bars that are within 100 feet of youth centers or schools? I mean, I can't see we can distinguish between intoxication from marijuana versus intoxication from alcohol.
We have a state ordinance that says that irrespective of what you think about alcohol, you can't have this within 600 feet of a youth center. So it's, the question is, 1, is it a youth center? And 2, do we follow the law?
Is that true, Mr. Priest? Is that what we're deciding here?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, if the commission concludes that this dance facility is a youth center as called out in our code, then there would be a problem making finding number 1, because there would be a distance restriction problem. On the other hand, if you conclude it is not a youth center, then that is not an issue under either our code or the state regulations. And as I had mentioned earlier, there is no strict distance requirement for alcohol, liquor uses like there are for cannabis facilities. They are regulated differently in that regard.
Well, I think it's a youth center.
So Commissioner Olanian, you had a comment, and then we can possibly vote on whether this is a youth center to get a show of hands on that so we know what kind of motion to make.
Okay, if you want to deal with that issue, my comment was going to deal with finding number 2 and some specifics on that too, which I also have problems with making finding number 2, but we can. Your suggestion is a good one.
Finding number 1 is dispositive. Am I correct, Mr. Priest?
Yes. If you conclude that this is a youth center, there's a distance restriction problem, finding number 1 cannot be made, and that would be dispositive and require denial of the CUP. Again, if you conclude that it is a youth center.
Can I just go through the commission individually and ask whether you conclude this is a youth center. Commissioner Olanian.
I find it to be a youth center.
Commissioner Song.
Youth center.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
My finding is that it's a youth center.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
It's a youth center.
Vice Chair Roberts. You're muted.
Given the information before us, I have to go with youth center.
Youth center. So can I take a motion to deny the application based on the inability to make the first finding?
Madam Chair, you already have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Hirschbein, seconded by Commissioner Alain, that found the facility to be a youth center.
So can we take that vote? And then I would like a little more discussion on this in case this is appealed to council. We can look at other issues, or is that appropriate, Priest?
Madam Chair, I would suggest that you continue your discussion at this point, and then you can make a motion, the appropriate motion, and, there would be the finding about finding number one, and then there may be additional, conclusions on other findings.
Well, already.
Pardon?
Mr. Priest, there is a motion on the floor already.
My motion included Mr. Priest's references to criteria one, or finding one and finding two. And if we want to be specific about finding two, we could add some wording in there to help council understand what our reasoning is. And Commissioner Olanian had some thoughts on that. If we want to include that in the motion, I'd be willing to listen to that.
My thought was this: the information in front of us, the information presented both through the testimony and the written letters, do not support the finding that the use is desirable or necessary for development of the community. Further, there are letters contradicting that and finding that this is not in the best interest of the community. We have letters from some of the residential areas. And because the need for cannabis for those who need it, because the needs can be met by other businesses within the community, there is not a need for this particular location to have a cannabis cultivation, manufacturing, or retail business.
And I'm willing to include that in the motion in some form that staff could word it.
Commissioner Maruzzi, you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I can't agree with that because we've heard the same arguments for every cannabis proposal project that has come before us. Every single one has objections, whether they're odor, whether they're typically odor, but for other reasons. And I don't think it's fair to take this applicant and say, well, there's so many others around, sorry, too late for that. It's just, I can stick with the first, but I can't agree with the idea that the community just can't.
Can we take two votes on it then?
Yes, let's take two votes on it. The first vote, do you want to do the first vote with Commissioner Olanian's additions, and the second vote just on turning it down on the first finding?
Well, let's take the first vote on the youth center issue.
Fine.
Finding one.
Can you call the roll on that? And this would be to reject the project based on the inability to make the first finding, in that we can't this isn't appropriate for a CUP because there is a youth center within 600 feet.
Madam Chair, I would just note that there's just one application before you. If the commission can't make one of the 5 findings, you are required to deny the application. So any additional findings that you make relative to the others are not really necessary. And certainly the commission could pass that information along if this application is appealed, but there really is one action on this item. A separate action on the additional recommendations is certainly something that you can forward as comments.
As an alternative, Madam Chair, from what Mr. Newell suggests, you could have a substitute, or I guess it wouldn't be a substitute motion. The original motion made by Commissioner Hirschbein was to deny based on both inability to find finding 1 and finding 2. You could entertain a vote on that one first, and if that fails to garner the required votes, you could take another motion just denying based on inability to make finding 2 or finding 1.
Why don't we do it that way?
Okay, I agree.
You have a motion, a second, based on finding 1 and not the inability to make finding 1 and finding 2. Will you call the roll?
Commissioner Hirschbein,
No.
Commissioner Alayan,
Yes.
No means you're making the decision.
No means I wanted to come back with just finding 1 based on my belief that if it's a unanimous decision, it has a stronger argument for council. And then we can make the recommendation about finding 2.
That sounds good. Okay.
Chair Womack,
No.
Vice Chair Roberts,
No.
Commissioner Song,
No.
Commissioner Maruzi,
No.
Can we do, and now let's call the roll just on the inability to make finding 1.
Commissioner Hirschbein,
Yeah, I'll make that motion. Is it it's a motion, right? Yes.
Commissioner Alayan,
Are you muted?
Her screen is frozen.
Yeah, we lost her.
Yeah.
He gave us a yes, I believe, in sign language.
Okay, thumbs up is a yes.
Chair Womack,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roberts,
Yes.
Commissioner Song,
Yes.
Commissioner Maruzi,
Yes.
The motion is defeated unanimously. Okay. It is 8 o'clock. Does anybody need a 5-minute break?
Madam Chair, I just want to make a correction to something you just said. It's technical and maybe not important, but you said the motion is defeated. The motion actually wins. The application is denied.
Thank you.
And yes, I vote for a 5-minute break.
Thank you. We will reconvene at 8:05. Welcome back. We're moving right along to items 3B, which would have been a public hearing. The City of Palm Springs for a zone text amendment to amend Chapter 94.05 of the zoning code to allow residential densities on properties that have historically been permitted on hotel and commercial sites. The recommendation is to continue the public hearing to our regularly scheduled meeting for September 1, 2021. Can I have a motion to continue this item?
So moved.
And a second by Commissioner Song. Everybody, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next item is unfinished, or is new. There is no unfinished business. There is new business. This is not a public hearing item. It is 5A, Chad and Tenna Dyer, owners of a major architectural application, an administrative minor modification application for the construction of a 5,846 square foot single family residence and a 576 square foot detached casita on a hillside location located at 585 Camino Caladat. Staff report, please.
Yes, good evening. Let me share my screen. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. The project in front of you tonight is a proposed new single-family residence on a hillside parcel. The project site is located at the intersection of West Ramon Road and Camino Caladat. The applicant is proposing the construction of a single-family residence and a detached casita with a roof deck and a subterranean parking. And the size of the lot is approximately 20,000 square feet. The proposed lot coverage of this project is 30%. The project site is adjacent to single-family residences on all sides. And the site's topography slopes down from the southwest corner to the north and east, as shown here in the red arrows. This project was reviewed by the Architectural Review Committee on June 21st. And at the meeting, the ARC voted unanimously to recommend approval to the Planning Commission, subject to the following conditions. The first one is to use a California farm farm instead of a Mexican farm farm, and the screening of the ramp at the front, and the installation of additional landscaping materials along the south and west property lines. This is a proposed architectural design. The proposed design is contemporary in style, and the proposed residence consists of the lower and upper level. And the lower level will be a subterranean parking space, and the residential portion will be located on top of it. The proposed overall building height is 23 feet and 7 inches. The proposed design exhibits a strong horizontal massing and a simplistic exterior treatment. The minor architectural details and the expansive vertical glazing, as you see here on the primary elevation, will accentuate the exterior of the building, which will complement a very organic landscape design. The proposed building and construction materials includes anodized the window framing system and the metal siding and bronze and cool champagne colors, and the stucco in a dark gray and white. And the proposed casita is going to be approximately 21 feet and 3 inches. This is the total building height, which includes the roof deck and guardrail. And the design and building form complements the primary residence. And these are the materials details. Again, the window systems will be dark bronze, anodized aluminum frame.
metal sidings in the 2 different colors, and then stucco in the dark gray and white. As the staff mentioned earlier, the proposed residence will accommodate a subterranean garage, and then also the new casita, and the new casita will accommodate a roof deck. In response to the concern raised by the nearby residents, the applicant prepared and submitted this line of sight diagram to share with the Planning Commission this evening. The applicant explains in a diagram that on the top of the roof deck, because of the existing tree and the new planting materials that will be installed at the site, the privacy of the property that's adjacent to the site, which is to the south, 587 Camino Calidad, it will not be impacted. And then also this diagram shows that the adjacent property to the west, 554 La Mirada, their privacy will also be secured because of the new trees that's going to be installed at the project site. Staff will just to share a little bit of information about roof deck. The zoning code does not provide regulations that are specific to roof decks. However, the overall building height, including the roof deck and the required safety guardrail and enclosure, cannot exceed the maximum allowable building height. When this project was reviewed by the ARC on June 21st, there was no discussion or comments provided that relate to the proposed roof deck. And this is a proposed planting materials. The materials are pretty common to this area, and the plant palette includes Palo Verde, palm, yucca, century plants, Texas lentils, and so forth. As the staff mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Architectural Review Committee is recommending the Mexican farm palm to be replaced with a California farm palm. And based on the submitted proposal, the staff finds that there is quite a bit of raised finished floor that's being involved. And just to show the finished floor of the adjacent property to the south, which is 587 Camino Calidad, that's 530.5. And the adjacent property to the north, 525 Camino Calidad, their finished floor is 522.4, making the elevation difference of approximately 8 feet. And the project is proposing the finished floor of 529.5, which is very similar to the finished floor of 587 Camino Calidad. Based on this information, our engineering division is recommending the proposed finished floor to be reduced by 4 feet approximately to be more consistent with the site's topography and the surroundings. In response to the engineering comment, the staff requested applicant to provide how the reduction in the finished floor can affect the project. And this is a response that we received. If the finished floor to be lowered by 4 feet, the project will require a retaining and a garden wall along the west property line, which height is going to be approximately 9 feet. And then also that will require 4-foot high retaining wall and the 6-foot high garden wall on top of it, which will create a 10-foot high wall along the south property line. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve this project subject to the following conditions. That replace all Mexican farm palm with the California farm palms as recommended by the AAC, as well as a screening of the ramp at the front and the installation of additional planting materials along the south and the western property lines, and then also reduce the finished floor to the average of the paths between the north and the south and the west properties. The engineering engineering division is recommending a 4-foot reduction. And this concludes the staff presentation. The applicant is available here this evening, and the staff is also available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff, Commissioner? And if you can, Noriko, if you can take this off of our computers right in our screens. Thank you. Commissioner Hirschmein and then Commissioner Roberts.
So if the commission accepts the recommendation of staff to reduce the pad height by 4 feet, would that include the casita as well?
I will ask the engineering staff to respond to your question.
But I mean, in your mind, is that an objective that you would try to achieve, or you don't care one way or the other about it, or you think it should remain where it is?
What engineering answer that question?
Well, what was engineering's criteria? I don't understand what their input was. What was their criteria for recommending it?
Good evening, Commission. When we look at site plans, typically we would look at these a little earlier than what we had received this, and we would vet out the existing pad heights that are there. For this particular tract, the rough grading plan that was done for this tract did not establish pad heights for the individual pads. Therefore, you have 2 existing homes, and the policy has always been that you try to split the difference between existing pads so that you have a consistency on that street and with your neighbors. And when we were able to review this, we noticed that the existing topography was going to place, and which is how they designed it, they were placing their new building pretty close to the same elevation as the upstream side of the street, and that's not a consistent policy with what we do.
And so what does that lead you to believe about the casita then? Would you agree that that needs to be lowered 4 feet as well?
Yeah, it would be the whole upper house area that's slated at the higher elevation, that the whole thing would need to come down.
Including the casita?
Correct.
Could you show the slide with those sections and those view arrows again then? Because that would, it'd help us understand whether there's a roof deck issue there or not, if it's to be lowered by 4 feet, if we agree with staff recommendation. No, the sight line, the ones that showed sight line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sightline, is this the one that?
Yeah, that one. Okay, so now instead of that guy's eye being there, it's probably sort of halfway in the middle of a handrail. I'm guessing that's about 4 feet down from his eyeball. Is that sound right?
Sounds about right.
Okay, so what does that tell you? Does that reduce his visibility into the adjoining property?
That will lower the line of sight according to the reduction in the finished floor. So the line of sight will be actually moved closer towards the trees that are existing and also proposed.
Well, from my point of view, I would just want to forget the trees for a minute, because trees grow, they die, they get trimmed. But just in terms of the sight line across the property to the adjacent property, does the 4 feet lower affect that person's ability to see into the adjacent property? Doesn't look like it would.
Let's see.
So Commissioner Hirschfein, the roof deck elevation will be at 534 instead of 538. And the adjacent home at 587 is at 530. So the roof deck would be roughly about 4 or 5 feet above the finished floor of the neighboring.
Okay. Okay, so there's still pretty good visibility into the house at that point, right?
So the height of the safety guardrail is 4 feet. So if you can imagine the line of sight to start at the bottom of this roof deck, you can probably imagine how that can potentially affect the adjacent property to the south.
Can you show me the other section? Okay, thank you. That was my question.
I believe Commissioner Roberts had a question.
I do, Madam Chair, thank you. Noriko, I should have asked for this earlier. What would help me is if there's an elevation of the front of this house that includes the two neighbor houses, or at least some idea of their heights in proximity to this proposed development. Does the city have anything like that, or could the applicant supply something like that? I'm guessing it exists somewhere.
Unfortunately, the submitted plans, the only elevations that are included are the ones that are included in this slide.
And the reason I'm asking is this neighborhood has quite a variety of heights and setbacks because it's a much older neighborhood. And there are some somewhat subterranean garages, and there's a real sort of blend. There's no real uniformity. And so it's difficult to gauge that this house would be a real problem as opposed to its neighborhood, unless I could make that comparison. I'm hoping maybe the applicant can show us something like that in his presentation.
Madam Chair, the applicant says that that information is available if the commission would like to see it.
I would like to see it.
Please ask them to show it to us.
And if we could see that now, it would be very helpful.
Mr. Bicknell, do we have that available? Or if there's a page that we can reference that you can either message me or pull it up on the share screen? Do we have the submittal page, Mr. Bicknell?
It doesn't look like it exists. I mean, it doesn't exist in anything the commission got.
That's correct. Is Mr. O'Donnell still here? Would he have that?
They indicate they have the site section, but not the elevation showing the actual frontage.
Is there a photograph?
Yeah, this is Lance O'Donnell. If it's helpful, we could continue this and supply it at your next meeting.
I believe that would be helpful and would make and if the commission agrees, would make a motion to continue this until September 1st. Commissioner Hirschfein.
Well, if you do that, and I agree with it, I'd like to see it ghosted in as proposed and ghosted in as staff recommends so we can compare the two.
I agree. That would be very helpful. What I specifically want to see is this house lined up, modeled in between the other two houses. Obviously, the other two houses don't need to be modeled more than just showing their heights. The more information, the better. I struggle a little bit with staff's recommendation only because it's hard to make that conclusion without comparison.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said ghosted. I actually should have said photoshopped in. I didn't mean just an outline.
Is September a big problem for the applicant?
No, it's not a problem.
Is it a problem for staff in terms of our agenda? Director Fagg, is it a problem for you in terms of our agenda?
I don't think it will be a problem, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I take responsibility for this. I should have asked for this sooner. And I think it'll make a real difference in our decision-making.
Commissioner Robertson, Commissioner Hirschman, could I also ask a east-west? So there's a comparison to the neighboring house to the east. So we're not just looking at it from the north-south view, but we're also looking at it from the east-west view.
Absolutely. The more information, the better.
If I could add something, when this comes back to you, when they are showing you the east-west views, I would like the commission to keep in mind that there is a 15-foot wide equestrian easement at the rear of this property. So it will be separated by walls on the property to the west, as well as walls of this applicant here. So you are going to see, essentially, it looks like an alleyway, so that when you do see this, when it returns, you will see that. So that's what you'll be looking at it in that rear part of the property.
But to the east on Camino Calidad, there's a single-story home that it should be in comparison. It should be looked in comparison to what is being proposed here.
Do we have all of the requests for the next meeting? Are there any others?
Ultimately, I just want to say that I think what we're asking for specifically is a true sense of scale of this proposed house against everything that exists now. Because staff's recommendation will make a significant difference in this house. So that's why I'm asking.
Can I take a motion to continue this to September 1st, 2021?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item is a discussion item. Palm Springs Country Club LLC for an amendment to the development agreement for Serena Park, an approved residential development consisting of 386 attached and detached residential units located at on 126 acres of land located north of Verona Road and east of Sunrise Way and southwest of the Whitewater River Wash. We are being asked to provide direction to staff, and we will schedule a public hearing for the first meeting of September 2021. Staff report, please, and then I think we will have some questions of Mr. Priest.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So as you've indicated, yes, this is an introduction to a revision to the development agreement for the Serena Park project. As you will all recall, this project is on the former Palm Springs Country Club golf course. It is the defunct golf course that is no longer there. The project consists of 386 units, including both detached units in the southerly portion of the project and then attached units on the northerly portion of the project. So it's both attached and detached residential units, a total of 386. The project, as I mentioned, is 386 units. It's over 126 acres of land. It originally involved a general plan amendment, plan development district tentative tract map that was approved in September of 2016. The development agreement, which is a condition of the entitlement, 2016 entitlement, was approved on July 19th of 2017 and then amended in October of 2018. Part of the development agreement included a performance schedule. So this was one of the attachments to the development agreement. And as you can see here, we're getting kind of near the lower portions of the dates for performing relative to the tentative schedule for the project. And as you'll note in the development agreement, there is a hard deadline of November 1st, 2021, that the applicant will have to have submitted the full payment that is required under the development agreement in the amount of $3 million. So they are requesting a revision to this performance schedule in order to facilitate the builder who is planning to do the initial phases of the project. They are requesting a delay of the $3 million payment to November 1st of 2022. And they're seeking verification that they can underground project utilities for homes that are developed in each respective phase. Now the phasing starts at the southeast corner of the project. So that is located near the Whitewater Drive entry at the southeast corner of the site. And then it goes northwest until it ultimately gets to San Rafael at the northwesterly portion of the site. So again, as I mentioned, this is really just an introduction of this proposed request. The applicant has provided some testimony this evening in terms of their position on the proposed changes. Staff has reviewed this under section 94 of our zoning code and under the development agreement process section that does require amendments to be processed as a new change or a new development agreement that still requires planning commission hearing and recommendation that would also be forwarded to the city council, who would also have a public hearing and decision. So that is the request for you, and we are happy to answer questions. As Chair Wermick has indicated, I believe Mr. Priest has also some additional comments. I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Before we go, some of the questions for Mr. Priest include the applicant said they were entitled to all of these changes. This was mere notification. Can Mr. Priest comment? I would take each of the three separately in terms of the development agreement. What requires changes? What can be notification?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I have taken a look at the development agreement that's included in your agenda packet here. The provisions that the applicant was talking about, mainly adjustment of the timelines and some of the deadlines in the development agreement, are written pretty clearly with some clearly defined dates. And if those dates aren't met, that may constitute a default under the agreement. There is a provision in the agreement, and I'm not sure if this is precisely what the developer was referencing earlier in his comments. There's section 1105 of the development agreement for force majeure and excusable delay, extension of time for performance. And it largely is a standard force majeure excusable delay clause for things such as war, insurrection, acts of God. A situation like COVID-19 would likely qualify as a basis for an excusable delay. However, the challenging provision in that paragraph is the following sentence: the party whose performance is prevented or delayed by such event shall give prompt written notice thereof to the other party, and both parties shall have agreed that performance is appropriately excused or delayed. My read of that type of provision is that notice of seeking force majeure, seeking excusable delay, should have come much earlier in the process than now. And my understanding from staff can correct me if I'm wrong, is that no such notice was given back when COVID-19 and the restrictions were put in place of March of last year. And there has been no notice since today. So my read of giving prompt written notice that we have an excusable delay should have been given a while ago. So there is a question whether that can be invoked at this point, so that the city and the developer just administratively can work out a time extension under that means. Beyond that, I don't see any other provisions of the development agreement that would allow, just at the staff level, for an extension of time to perform the various obligations in the development agreement. And absent any other provision in the agreement that allows that just extension to be done administratively, then it would require a formal amendment to the development agreement to change those timeframes as outlined.
Madam Chair, I would just also note, just to clarify at one point, the developer did respond to staff's request for an annual review last October. They did indicate that they were unable to continue with the final development plan that was submitted. I believe it was either the end of 2019 or the early portion of 2020 as a result of a recommendation from the AAC and ultimately the COVID-19 impact. So they did indicate that there were some issues with moving the project forward relative to COVID-19, as well as the AAC's review of the project. But there was no specific identified request to extend any portion of the performance schedule.
Just one question with that on page 6. It also says that the payment, the failure to pay the fee on a date certain shall be an issue of default.
That is correct, Madam Chair. The development agreement on page 6, as is common with development agreements, is in addition to the developer paying the various building, planning, and other development fees that are part of the city's usual schedule, it is not uncommon that there is also a development agreement fee, some additional payment due under the agreement, and this is no exception. There is a $3 million payment that is due. The paragraph says November 1st, 2021. It does not provide in that paragraph for any extensions or contingencies that would alter that final payment date. And as you noted, Madam Chair, the language is quite clear that failure to pay the entire development agreement fee by November 1st, 2021 shall constitute a default. So again, if the conclusion is that there was no notice given to invoke the force majeure excusable delay clause in the contract, then the developer is coming up to a deadline where that $3 million development agreement fee needs to be paid, or else there is the risk of going into default on the agreement.
Madam Chair, I have a question about schedule right now that I think is important. And my question is to staff. I'm looking at the originally approved schedule, and it shows that on October of 2019, which was still a solid 6 months before shutdown of COVID, the applicant was to have the improvement plan approved and recorded phase 1 map. Did the city receive that?
The city did receive a request for plan check to review a portion of the tract map, but there was no further responses to the plan check comments that were given.
And when were they given the responses or questions? After the city got the map?
I would have to look at the specifics for that.
The reason I'm asking this question is I certainly understand the applicant looking for a schedule change based on a lost year with the pandemic. What's important to know, I think, is if they were on schedule prior to that. And that would relate to that October 19th date and responses from the city. So I would like to have that information when the city actually submitted questions or responses to the map that you just mentioned.
Can you put that your slide up that shows the items? And because I was going to ask about what has been accomplished and if they're within the time frame already. And you're right, pre-COVID.
So we did do an annual review in 2019, and we presented that to the commission in December of 2019, noting they had submitted the initial phase 1 map. It was a very small portion of the map, but
so they didn't comply with the entire requirement. If they only submitted a small portion, does that satisfy the development agreement requirement?
They were not in compliance with this requirement that it be approved, no.
And had they submitted, because I know that this is unusual, this was an unusual PD in that it was so complicated, we never got approved drawings on any of the houses or landscape plans or anything. So, for example, the conformance review we went through last week, we would not be able to do. We have to go through a whole review process on what they're proposing to build.
Yeah, we did get the final development plan submittal from the applicant, and that was, as I mentioned, reviewed by AAC back in March of 2020. But they had some concerns with some of the design, so the item was basically continued for additional study, and the applicant has not resubmitted, and they have indicated that it was due to the builder losing interest as a result of the AAC's recommendations.
And did they include the attached housing as well in that submittal?
No, so the first phase is really only the detached housing at the southeast corner.
And the development agreement only references the first phase?
No, it references all of the phases in the timeline. So that gets closer towards phase 2 and 3 is really 2021.
But were they required to provide that final application for phase 2 as well, or just phase 1?
Just phase 1 back in October of 2019.
Were they compliant then? Because in October of 19th, it says approval and record phase 1 map. And you're saying that's the southeast corner. Did that include the total phase 1? Were they in compliance at that time?
No, they were not.
What were they specifically missing at that time?
They had submitted improvement plans and a tentative map for phase one, but those were not approved or recorded.
And they didn't move forward with it.
Correct.
It just stopped.
So you heard nothing from that October point to the shutdown point 6 months later for COVID.
No, the project was reviewed by the architectural committee in March of 2020.
When we
I'm sorry.
get this back as a staff report for next time, can you include what was gotten, not just dates, but what was submitted?
Yes.
And the notes from the AAC and then the AAC and what happened,
Yes.
as well as your report, your compliance report on a yearly basis.
Commissioner Songs had her hand up for a while.
Sorry.
I have three questions. One is for engineering. It's just the understanding of if the project were to move forward and the utility underground were to be done before certificate of occupancy, how does that threaten or create consequences to a different condition than what was stated earlier with engineering condition 52? That's one. Second is we're really trying to see here if the developer is going to move forward with this project or not. So is there a way that there could be $500,000 or part of the fee being done accelerated and not wait another year and a half for the $2 million fees? And then the third issue is, since we are considering this application and the extension, and it's been over almost 2 years, does this commission have the ability to look at the project and make revisions or recommendations, because it's been 2 years since the project has been looked at?
Well, I want to take those separately. The fee question is a really very separate question. So one question, if I'm looking at your questions, one is, can we look at it? Two is the fee. And three, is this project actually going to go forward?
And then, yes, right. And then how does the requirement of undergrounding, in other words, undergrounding utilities before certificate of building occupancy versus our original engineering condition, which is to underground utility before grading begins? My understanding, Mr. Minjares, is so that the utilities are out of the way and so they're free and clear to do their project. So if we reverse the order, does that create havoc into any development?
That is a question for me. I'm sorry.
Let's get first. There are three different things they've asked us. One is the fee, two is the schedule, and third is the undergrounding of utilities. What is your feeling about what they proposed? That's a question to engineering.
I couldn't hear you, Kathy. I'm sorry. It was pretty jumbled up.
Just answer, if you can answer Maria's question about engineering. Do you need the undergrounding of the utilities to go forward first?
Yeah, this question actually came up by somebody in the neighborhood. I guess it was being tossed around by the developer of whether or not we would allow phasing of the undergrounding of utilities, or whether or not we would defer that to a later time. And that answer would be no. In order to get the utilities out of the way, they have to go in the ground first. There's just too much logistics in the way of deferring that to a later time.
Hearing that from our engineering department, does anybody have any questions on that as a piece of our answer?
Well, what I want to know is what we're going to try to accomplish tonight. We're asking specific questions and we're looking for some information to come back. City Council's looking for our recommendations on some very specific issues. I don't know that we're prepared to make those recommendations right now. Can we continue this?
No, I think we're not making recommendations now, but we have heard something on one of those questions. I think something in writing from engineering would be helpful when this comes back in September. And an explanation of how you would handle that request and why.
And to see everything that's been done on this project so far. I think what we need to determine, and I think another commissioner brought it up, we need to determine how real this project is today.
From an engineering standpoint, just for some clarity for the commission, engineering has not received any technical studies. We haven't received any improvement plans for any kind of review. All we've seen is just the overall site map of the project. And then, as Mr. Newell indicated, we did receive a small portion of a track map, but it was just a track map submittal. It never went into plan check and it was never recorded.
So again, letting us know what you've received and what you haven't received. Thank you. The second question on this, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the history of the fee. The fee, the $3 million fee is a density transfer fee, which was originally required to be paid at the time the development agreement was signed. And it was prior to our having our golf course ordinance. It was a density transfer fee to take a project from open space to a rezoned project. And JR, maybe you can talk a little bit about the history, because it was originally required at signing of the DA. So
well, you know, in a very straightforward way, it was a gift to the developer, and meaning not requiring that payment right away. There was no reason not to. But the reason I'm being specific about the schedule is it was very, very important for this project to stay on schedule and to show us all the way through that it was real and that it was continuing. And I haven't seen any of that yet. And based on what engineering said and what planning said, very little work has really occurred here. These site drawings that they're talking about go all the way back to their original approvals. I don't see much new work since then. And I'm nervous about the viability of this project. I think we're wasting our time until we know that there's real viability. We've all unfortunately had our hand burned over and over with developers continuing and continuing and continuing and then going bankrupt or losing their financing. I think we need some proof. That's something council needs to determine, but I think what they're looking for us to do is really look at where they are to date and make our recommendations based on that.
So that's the thing we're discussing. And what do we need, or do we have comments that we can give on that now? Commissioner Maruzzi.
Just regarding the force majeure aspect, you know, the Cody project, Cody Place, has been under construction almost entirely through COVID. So I don't know if that, you know, you can use COVID for almost anything. So I don't know if that even applies here for force majeure, but let's put that aside for a moment. I heard somewhere a comment that the AAC's recommendations were so off-putting to the builder that the builder just walked away. Now, I remember hearing that, and where did that come from? I heard it tonight.
Correct. In the response to our request for an annual review and what their position was on the project, They indicated on March 2nd, 2020, the AAC reversed its approval and unanimously denied the application, stating the entire project needed redesign. This action of negating entitlements had the consequence of killing off the owner's financial and equity interest in the project. This, combined with COVID restrictions, killed any efforts at moving forward for weeks.
So based on that, I think there's a lot of evidence that this project is not moving forward. I don't know how much more evidence we need, but if we would like to wait for more evidence, that's fine.
I think it falls upon the developer, the owner, to show that to us the next time it comes before us, to prove to us that it's still happening. And this just isn't another bookmarking or a placeholder.
So I'm certainly not inclined to recommend or approve an extension of any kind.
What we might do is just clarify the specific items that the commission will need for your review in September before we make any specific conclusions tonight on a recommendation, because we need to do it at the public hearing. So what I've heard so far is we need the history here in terms of what they've submitted to staff to process the project and move it forward. That's number one. Number two, the history of the annual reviews that we've conducted since the original development agreement. That's number two. And if there's any additional materials, it sounds like you've asked the applicant to provide some additional clarification. We can request that from them. But if there's anything else the commission would like to see, please.
Well, I'd like to see related to financing for building and the things that I raised. Do they have a builder? Where are they with this? Identify a builder and show us how realistic it is to move forward. Do they have financing? Does the builder have financing? We need some real information.
Do they have, when would we see technical studies? What have they done?
The owner, sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair.
Definitive drawings. We've never seen plans for the houses that they were going to build in phase one. Landscape plans. We've seen none of that. So what do they have, and what do they have in the way of, have they applied for a grading permit? And I would like to see how well they've maintained the property. I think Commissioner Robertson, I sent you 2 pictures from looking at the property. What had they agreed to do? Have they met all of their obligations in the way of maintaining the property over the last 5 years?
Also, can the staff please show the rest of the commission the picture that I took today on site? And Chair Wormick, I think you took some photos as well.
Right, I sent one if staff wants to show it. Unfortunately, it has an expletive in it that I hadn't noticed when I sent it to you.
I've covered it. I'm sure, but I've covered that expletive.
Can we take those photos right now, please?
Yes.
This relates to the condition and maintenance of the property.
And if you can show the other picture.
You send that? Let's see. Not sure I have it, Madam Chair.
I think it's one that Commissioner Roberts sent to you.
Grab it.
Photo from Commissioner Vice Chair Roberts.
that's it. I think this also requires that we have a long talk about the condition of this property.
For the director, do you need anything specifically on the 3 asks?
No, we've heard your comments. This will assist the applicant in preparing their presentation to you at the public hearing on September 1st. So again, I think we've got the information that we need and the things that you would like us to present to you next month in September.
Did the third entryway, the third entrance, was that part of the development agreement?
Yes.
And was there a time frame on that?
No, we didn't get that. There's a entry that is controlled by the 5 HOAs that are in the center island of the main golf course area.
No, but that's not what I'm asking. So the third entryway is required under the development agreement. Is there a time frame for acquiring that right away?
No, it wasn't required. It was 2 entries, 1 on each side.
So a third entry is not required?
And there's an exit. Am I correct? There are 2 entries and an exit.
The Francis Drive point is an emergency exit only. So no, there isn't a third point of access other than the emergency exit.
So it was not required then?
It was,
no, it was not.
The quote is very accurate that we wanted it, or at least I wanted it, that the one of the neighbors gave, but I don't think we were able to get it. Commissioner Olani?
Yes, I was just going to ask, can staff be prepared to address that question? The questions that were brought up by the gentleman from the Gene Autry neighborhood organization regarding a third access point, and can that be, given that we are apparently amending or being asked to amend the development agreement, can we renegotiate other points of things that we recommended, such as a third entrance point?
The real question is, can we make any amendments? Am I correct, Commissioner Lanian? Because they've asked us to open it up. Commissioner, any other comments on this? Commissioner Song.
Yes, just a clarification. Is the density transfer fee still part of the agreement, or has it been evaporated because of the housing RENA or other bigger issues? Chairwoman, you're shaking your head no.
My understanding is that it's absolutely part of the agreement.
It definitely was. It was a big part of this development approval from the get-go. Again, we gave them the gift of deferring it. Now, given where we are today, I'm sorry we did. And it sounds again like one of the recommendation the council's looking for from us in the amendments. And with respect to the questions and things the developer's asking for, we need to respond to those to make recommendations. I guess the council's ultimately going to make these decisions, but I think they're looking for us to vet it all. Am I correct, staff?
That's correct, Commissioner Roberts. As an amendment to the development agreement, that does certainly change the terms to what was previously agreed upon. So the commission can make other recommendations on the development agreement.
Thank you.
If anyone else, this was a pretty complicated project. I think we started work on it in 15 and finished in 16 or 17. Anybody who's new to the commission, I think only Commissioner Hirschbein, were you here for part of this? You were, weren't you?
I know I was here for AAC, and I think most of it had gone through by the time I got to Planning Commission.
Commissioner, I was here for all of it. Commissioner Roberts was here for a beginning piece of it until he was elected to council.
It had gone through the Planning Commission a number of times, and then it stayed with council forever. Staff put in tremendous amount of hours and work on this project.
And I believe worked with about 10 neighborhoods regarding traffic and other issues. So if anybody needs background on it and decisions that were made, you should either ask staff or I'd be happy to chat with you. Without editorial comments, just what happened. Okay, I think we have, do you have a summation, Flynn and David, of what we've asked for? Okay, we are done with this issue. Moving right along. Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. There being none, the planning director's report.
Madam Chair, one item that we wanted to ask the commission about is on the September 1st meeting, we were scheduling, we wanted to see the availability of commissioners in order to conduct a study session before the meeting. What we would like to talk about are one or potentially two things. One being the review of the solar energy guidelines, or solar energy ordinance relative to commercial cannabis grow facilities, as well as other commercial uses. So that's something that we wanted to have a study session on with the commission. So hopefully that will be on September 1st. We also wanted to have a training session on our architectural review and development permit process. So we just wanted to check and see if the commission had availability to start earlier for that study session on September 1st.
Mr. Newell, I believe the study session was also going to include water usage with cannabis.
Yep, we can include that information as well.
Can we make sure that there's enough time in the study session? Sometimes it's been pushed out and we've taken more time than we were granted. Starting at 4, perhaps. I don't know what time we typically start these study sessions these days, but we've gone beyond the time allocated.
Would it be possible to have a study session in person? They're so much better in person than they are on Zoom.
We can check with the city manager to see if that's possible, and we will get back to the Planning Commission members and let you know.
And may I ask, is it also possible to find out if we can meet in general without an audience, much in the way the city council's doing right now?
Yeah, there's some slight difficulties with boards and commissions in terms of being able to do the commission in person with applicants via Zoom due to some staffing issues, but we will see if that's possible. So we'll check on both of those for you.
Well, at this study session, have a energy consultant who we can vet out some of the questions as far as what is realistic and with Title 24 and, you know, size of the buildings and electrical demand of, you know, how we can come up with clear rules of what would be required for dispensary projects.
Yeah, we hope to have some clear direction and specifics on those items when we have that discussion.
And we will be meeting with people from sustainability who've been working on this issue for years.
So I guess it sounds like everyone will be available to start a little bit earlier that day and potentially slightly earlier than we might otherwise normally. So potentially 4 o'clock or 4:30 if we need to, depending on the number of items we have on the study session. So we'll plan for that.
You want to do it on the 1st? Is that, you don't want it on a separate date?
We could do it on a different day if the commission desired to do that.
I think we get better work done if we separate the two.
One of the problems that we'll have is that we run into the holidays if we do it on your regular date. The other issue we have is we run into other conflicts with boards and commissions. Also, if we try to do it earlier than September 1st, Commissioner Hirschbein is out of town. So we have problems with vacation schedules.
Commissioner Mauritius too, what days do people get back from vacations?
August 31st. I scheduled it around our schedule.
Same with me.
Why don't we keep this one at 4 o'clock? Because we may have one more session depending on how much you need to evaluate.
I concur with Commissioner Song. Let's see if we can keep it together in one day. And if we don't get enough done, that'll force us to create another date.
And this is just before the Labor Day weekend, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm good with 4 o'clock. I'd love it if we would have a 15-minute break in between the two meetings so that my legs remain functional.
Legs.
Commissioner Lane, I can come help push your refrigerator into your office.
Please.
Okay, so we are adjourning until 4 o'clock on September 1st for a study session.
Hey, gonna miss you all.
Possibly we had 2 appeal items go before City Council. Do you want to mention what happened at those?
That got garbled.
That was a question for David and Flynn.
Could you repeat the question, Madam Chair?
We had 2 items go on appeal.
Okay.
Can you just?
Certainly. So we had the King's Garden item from Planning Commission that was called forward by council members. The council deferred action on the item pending additional research relative to environmental impacts, specifically looking at energy needs and water. You heard a report from Ms. Nicole Christ of Terra Nova, who was also the environmental consultant on that project earlier this evening. There was also some discussion about their failure to mitigate odors at the ANZA facility. And so they requested some additional information relative to that. So again, the City Council took no action on the item and will hear it at a later date. The second item that was brought forward was the Canyon View project. The City Council took testimony on the item. heard reports from our environmental consultant, and ultimately it was a split vote 3-2 to approve the project with the conditions that Planning Commission had imposed to address some of the concerns that were raised by residents. So that was a split vote 3-2 to approve the Canyon View project. And those were the two items that were heard at the most recent City Council meeting. Also, they discussed the housing element, not on Thursday night. It got too late. So they held a special meeting on Monday morning, and Mr. Newell conducted that session with the City Council. We took their input. There were a lot of similar concerns to those that you all raised. And so we've been in the process of combining your comments and the comments of City Council and feeding those to our consultant, who will then submit the document on Friday to the state.
Can we get copies of the document by email?
Yes, we'll provide you with copies of the updated document. One of the other things that we've been requested to provide to you is a list of all of your comments. We'll provide those to you as well as the comments of City Council. So probably by next week, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you.
And regarding the public hearing that will occur, is that several months from now after we get the response back from the state?
Correct. We will bring the housing element back to you once we receive the comments from the state.
And the land use map that we also looked at?
Yes.
Okay, and I know that there's some restrictions on what we can change, what we can't, but hopefully there's enough flexibility to make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm sorry. The one item the City Council took off of the land use element was the the acreage above Desert Highlands. And that isn't being put into the RENA numbers or into the land use map at this time. They wanted to do further study on it. With that, is there anything else? We are adjourned until 4 o'clock on September 1st. Have a really lovely August.
Recording stop.